Sohail, we can start the session in a minute, right?
Yes. Jaipal's also here. Oh, okay. I mistook. I thought he was there. Hi, Jaipal.
Hey,
Hi.
hi, Sil. Hi, Advaita.
Hi, Jaipal.
Yes, it's exactly 4, so maybe we can wait for another minute or two, and then we'll start. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Amrita, these are the questions that participants had posted, right? So,
Yes.
we'll probably address them first, and then if anybody has online interaction meeting, if any questions, then we can take them up, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, maybe we can make a start with a kind of an introduction. So yes, thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks for signing up for our NPTEL course in Basic Ornithology. This is our 5th iteration of this course. We started in 2022. We've been running it every year since then. My name is Suhail. I'm one of the instructors. We have Dr. Jayapal over here as well. And many of you know, I think Amrita, who's helping us teach the course. Of course, there are many more instructors for the course. We are doing this live session as part of the weekly live sessions, which will reflect upon in some way what we have covered the previous week. If you haven't yet signed up for a course on NPTEL, if this is your first course on the platform, then let me just give a brief overview of how it works. So the content of the course, of course, is arranged into different sections taught by different teachers, faculty members, spanning over 12 weeks. At the end of each of those weeks is an assignment. It's actually a quiz, I think 20 questions per quiz. Amrita, if I misspeak or say something wrong, please interrupt and correct me. Yeah? And then you have a week, or is it 10 days, something like 10 days to complete that assignment or the quiz questions. And those assignments or questions, multiple choice questions, are open books. So you're welcome to refer to the course material, the videos, and anything else in answering those questions. And so hopefully, if you don't know or are confused about an answer, you can always look it up. So hopefully all of you will do really well on those weekly assignments. And then at the end of the course, the end of the 12 weeks, a few weeks after that will be the final exam. And the final exam has to be taken in person. For the vast majority of people, you'll have to register, and that is the only part of the course where there's some payment involved. If you do want a certificate of completion, then you do have to take the final exam, for which the fee is 1,000 rupees. But if you just want to learn with us and know more about ornithology, and you don't particularly care about a certificate and you don't need it, then it's entirely free. You don't. There's no cost involved to you. I think that's about it. If there are questions about the logistics of the course, we'll get to them. Maybe after we have dealt with the first week's material. So in the previous week, we started off with just a very brief introduction to ornithology by me, and then some more detailed lectures by Dr. Jayapal, who's over here. So we'll take questions about the content of week 1, addressed either to me or to Dr. Jayapal during this interaction. And of course, if some of you are still not clear on the operational parts of the course and various things to do with that, then you're welcome to ask. Yeah, for example, there's a question here: what is the benefit of the certificate? So there are some benefits. There are some very specific benefits, especially for students who are enrolled in degree courses and whose institution allows them to take NPTEL courses for credit. So our course is also accredited for academic credit, and many students, actually many undergraduate students, perhaps even postgraduate students, I'm not sure, take this course and other courses on the NPTEL platform for their academic credit. So they will need a certificate to as a certification of having completed the course. If you are not in an educational program, if you are taking this out of enjoyment and just the love of birds, or wanting to know more about ornithology, then there's no particular reason for the certificate. You're very welcome not to pay the fee and sign up for the exam and not get the certificate. That's perfectly fine. So it's entirely up to you in that situation. So I will start. There was a Google form circulated earlier, and some of you put in some questions. One or two are addressed, I think, to me. And the others are addressed to Dr. Jayapal, most of them, I think. So I will just talk about a couple of things. And yeah, sorry, this is Hirok, no? Yes, you want to join WMC program? Yeah, it might help you. That's right. Yeah. So Jayapal, are you seeing the questions? I think, I could take one or two of them, like rows 8 and 9 and 10.
Yes, Suhail. I guess, I think, please take those
and then
questions.
the others, I think, are based on your lectures.
Yeah.
And the questions to me are very broad. What are the limitations of ornithology? And I don't quite know whether you mean what is the scope of ornithology. If so, the scope of ornithology is basically anything to do with the study of birds. and we know what birds are, I suppose. I think I sort of defined what birds are, and Dr. Jaipal as well. Um, so yeah, any aspect of the study, both Jaipal and I are ecologists, so we tend to focus on the ecological and behavior and evolutionary studies of birds. We don't tend to focus so much on aspects like physiology or what's happening inside the birds, so the anatomy and physiology and so on. But we do have Dr. Sahas Barve,
Next week.
who will be focusing on those. That's next week, is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, so within those broad frames, from the physiology, which is what's going inside the body, to the behavior, the ecology, the evolution, up to populations and their role in ecosystems and globally, all of that is covered under the scope of ornithology. And if the person who asked the question is here, if you have a follow-up, please feel free to type it in the chat box. I should have said yes. Please feel free at any time to type your question in the chat box. We will, Jaipal and I will take them in a order that we feel is logical. So if your question isn't answered immediately, please don't be disheartened. Just wait, and we'll get to the question for sure. Another question that came in, which I guess I can take a stab at answering or addressing, is what happens to nature if birds disappear or become very few in number? And that's a really interesting question that is equally a question about birds or any aspect of ecosystems, any taxon, whether it's insects or mammals or plants. And of course, there's a bit of a hierarchy here. Some parts of the ecosystem are in some sense more fundamental than other parts. So as you know, what underlies all ecological systems are plants, basically the creatures that can magically turn sunlight and carbon dioxide and water into living stuff. Without plants, there would be no birds, no insects, would be no us. So plants are the most fundamental building blocks of ecosystems. And on top of that, of course, there are many other parts of the ecosystem which play various roles in the interactions among different species. So insects, for example, are there as predators of other insects. They're there as herbivores of plants. They're there as parasites and parasitoids. They're there as pollinators. And birds play some of those roles as well. Birds can be pollinators. They're food for other creatures. They play roles as dispersers and so on. So, but of course, different kinds of birds might have different fundamental value in an ecosystem. And we sometimes say as a approximation that the ecosystems are like a web, an interwoven web of connections, and if we cut any of those connections, which is like, suppose one of those species becomes extinct, then the entire web falls apart. And that's not entirely true, because very often there are other creatures, sometimes other birds, that play a similar role, that can take over the role of a bird that goes extinct or declines in number. So, for example, if there's an insect-eating bird that declines, and its role in controlling the population of the insects it's eating thereby reduces, that doesn't mean that insects are going to boom all of a sudden, because there may be other birds or other creatures like other insects that are also insect-eating that can fill in that gap. So sometimes there's this role redundancy. So that thankfully, because many species have gone extinct in the last 100-200 years, and ecosystems are under threat, of course, but they haven't completely collapsed. And that's often because other species step in. Now, when entire groups of species get threatened, like we see now with insect-eating birds in India or all across the world, or we see now with the carnivorous birds like scavengers like vultures, but also other carnivores like big eagles. If all of them decline and there's nothing else to take their place, then we can expect to see major downstream knock-on effects over time of the reduction and extinction of these species. So we know from an effort called the State of India's Birds assessment, which both Jaipal and I are involved in, that there are some groups of birds in India that are doing very poorly, including insect-eating birds and carnivorous birds, including scavengers. But there are other groups of birds that are doing quite well on average, including nectar-feeding birds and at least small-bodied fruit-eating birds. So it's a mixed kind of bag. It's not really mixed. Majority of birds are declining, but some groups of birds are not doing so badly. So to predict exactly what happens when a bird declines or becomes extinct, it becomes important to know what exact role that bird was playing in the ecosystem, and are there other parts of the ecosystem that can fill in to compensate for the reduction or the extinction of the species. So there isn't a single answer to this. There are some historical examples that have been studied with the dodo bird, for example, going extinct. The dodo was the only consumer and disperser of the fruits of a particular tree. And so the extinction of the dodo on which island, Jaipal? Mauritius.
Mauritius, yeah.
Mauritius condemned this species of tree also to extinction. That's because of the very tight one-to-one relationship between them. So some of those examples we know, but other examples we need to discover, we need to uncover the details before we can make a prediction. That's why it's so nice to see all of you here. You're all interested in ornithology and the way in which birds interact with their ecosystem, and for us to understand what are going to be the consequences of various global catastrophes, in a sense, including climate change and decline of insects and the increase of pesticides and fertilization of the atmosphere and the soil, and so many other global effects. What are those effects going to be on ecosystems as a whole? It needs a large number of people to be interested in these questions and to tackle these questions as researchers, and of course to be curious about them as ordinary citizens that all of us are. So I'm sure all of you, I mean, normally the people who register for this course are a mixture of those who are studying and those who are curious about taking up ornithology or ecology as a formal discipline of study. Mixture of those kinds of people, as well as people who are enthusiasts, who may be in all kinds of different fields, and maybe doctors and, I don't know, engineers, pharmacists, shopkeepers, bus conductors, anything. And we tend to have a roughly half-half split between enthusiasts and people who are taking this course more for academic reasons. And that's, we really love it. We like it that there's this mixture of audience here with us. So with that, I think I will stop, because I think that's all I have in terms of what people have put questions in the Google form. Just to remind you, as Dr. Jaipal is continuing to answer questions that have come in advance, all of you are very welcome to invite you to please put in your questions in the chat box over here for either me or Dr. Jaipal. Yeah. So with that, I'll hand over to Jaipal.
Yeah, yes, Suhail. Thanks, Suhail. Let me first get into the Excel sheet that's been, spreadsheet that's been shared with us. So we'll go one by one, Suhail, then maybe by the time we finish, then we'll look at the chat box and any questions have come up from the participants in the live questions. So the first question is that, what does it mean to be diagnostically distinct with respect to phylogenetic species concept? Well, as per the diagnosis, phylogenetic species concept, the diagnostically distinct means, it could be, the taxa should show very diagnostically, differences in terms of morphology or song structure or, physiology or even behavior or ecology. So that's good enough, because what happens is that phylogenetic species concept is based on the presumption that the taxa are descended from this recently same ancestor. And so one of the way to corroborate that the descent from the same ancestor is the diagnosable, basically the similarity and also the diagnosability. So that's, it's a bit ambiguous in terms of, like, for example, some of the phylogenetic species concept taxonomies consider particular characteristics as diagnostically distinct, while others may not agree on that. And so to avoid that, now instead of diagnosable distinctness, they actually look at the period of divergence. If these two taxa diverged less than 2 million years ago or more than 2 million years ago, the thumb rule, the convention is that if the two taxa diverged, less than 2 million years ago, they're conveniently put at a subspecies. But if it is 2 million years or older than 2 million years, then they are considered as species, distinct species. And that's the crux of the issue. And the same participant has another question. Alan Fiducia's Big Bang theory and Cracroft's gradualism theory, how are they related to band and band groups? Okay, I think this question came because I put these two differences in the same table. I think even earlier schools also people got confused about that. In fact, there is no relationship because Fiducia, Cracroft's theories are actually related to the diversification of early modern birds, where the diversification began before the KT extinction event or after the KT extinction event. But that is nothing to do with birds are dinosaurs or birds are not dinosaurs things. That's dates back much to Thomas Huxley, and it's almost 200, 300 years back from those arguments. So no, they don't have any relationship. They're completely two independent schools and thinkings and questions in evolutionary biology of birds. The Cretaceous-Tertiary boundary, 66 million was marked by mass extinction of non-avian dinosaurs and over 75% of other taxa, including early modern birds. What is believed to have caused this? Okay, I thought that was the question that we should ask you at the end of the quotes. But anyway, as you see that slides, actually, it's very clear that KT boundary was created by the meteorite. There's a large meteor. I think probably historically the last known one. So it was apparently 115-kilometer diameter, these things, that meteorite that hits the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. And it's that the hot spot where the meteorite hits the Earth. It was almost 66 to 68 million years ago. It's underwater and the Gulf of Mexico, but still people can actually see that crater and everything. And this is one of the probably this impact was quite huge in the sense that it created a huge dust storm, and for several thousands of millions, 1 million years, the Earth was surrounded by dark cloud of dust, and the sunlight was completely cut off. So everything, quite a few, almost 80 to 85% of the dinosaurs, the non-avian dinosaurs and its recent ancestors, they became extinct because of this meteorite strike. And that's what happened to we conventionally call it as KT boundary because it happened between the transition of Cretaceous period and Tertiary period. But in modern literature, if you look at, I think they call it as KPG. Basically the Tertiary period is subdivided into Paleozoic. So it's Tertiary Paleozoic era split. So that's what happened 68 million years ago. And it's interesting that the another corollary question is that if the dinosaurs went extinct, how did some of the modern birds survive this meteoric strike and survived? And there are quite a few hypotheses. And recently, one of the most plausible one is that maybe because the early birds, the early ancestors of the modern birds have beaks, and some of them have toothed beak, some of them lacked the tooth. And so the species which lacked teeth and they have a well-developed beak, they were more adapted to feed on plant resources like seeds, fruits, and other things. So during the KT extinction, those birds had an edge over the early ancestors of modern birds, which were actually carnivorous. So, and the widespread belief is that the so-called herbivorous birds, they survived this catastrophe and then radiated again after the KT extinction, massively into multiple clades. So that's one hypothesis which has been widely believed to be true. But there are several other hypotheses to say why some of the birds survived the dinosaurs became extinct. Seeking clarity on the concept of basal taxa. Okay, galliforms are basal taxa. So basal taxa, it's a very simple concept, just as the term says. So basically, as you would have seen from the slide, the descent or the evolutionary tree of a particular taxa, like birds or any other organisms, or even within the birds, if it is waders or if it's raptors, we always try to show it in a graph, like dendrogram. We call it a dendrogram, right? So with the beginning of the dendrogram is what we call the basal taxa. Basically, the basal taxa is the one which, which probably serve as the ancestor for the other derived taxa. So the with the leftmost, or if it is the horizontal dendrogram, the leftmost one. If it is the vertical dendrogram, it will be the bottommost one, which will be called basal taxa. And why pterosaurs were not taken into consideration for this, even though it existed with wings? Okay, that's an interesting question. It was almost, I think this question pops up every interaction meeting, actually. So the pterosaurs are actually they're not dinosaurs. So pterosaurs, they look exactly like dinosaurs, but they were not. In fact, pterosaurs originate from the Archosaurian zone. If you remember the cladogram that I showed in the evolutionary slide. So if you look at the 200 to 250, I think 250 million years, so I think Triassic period, where their ancestors, archosaurs are the ancestors of all the crocodiles, ornithischian dinosaurs, saurischian dinosaurs, and pterosaurs. So all the four groups, basically dinosaurs, crocodiles, and pterosaurs, all the three groups basically, and of course there are two types of dinosaurs. So all the three groups, they evolved at around the same time, 200 to 250 million years ago in the Triassic period from the archosaurs. So pterosaurs, even though they had very well, flight, they had very well developed wing-like structures, not really wings, wing-like structures, which also powered them with a good flight. But their wings were more homologous with what we see today as bats. They're kind of the limbs. So in that sense, the wings of pterosaurs and the wings of birds or the theropod dinosaurs, which could fly, they were not homologous. They're like homoplasty. The other presentation I had made the difference between homology and homoplasty. So they were, though they look similar functionally, but then their developmental pathway is completely different. And also, if you look at the pterosaurs, I think the pterosaurs, one of the thing which modern birds with linked to theropod dinosaurs is that the hind limb myology, basically the musculature of the hind limb, and also the other skeletal characters, which are completely different in pterosaurs. So obviously, pterosaurs were never considered as ancestors of birds, even though they looked similar to birds in flight. In the list of region-wise endemic avifauna of India, total number of species to overshoot 78 species. Okay. Sorry, I think, in this presentation, I should have made it very clear. The number of endemics that we have put in different biogeographical regions, is also shared with like, for example, shared with our neighboring countries. Like, for example, there will be, probably 28 species which are restricted to the Eastern Himalaya. But they may not always be endemic to India, because some of them will also be found in China, Chinese Tibet, or even in Myanmar. So that's why it won't tally up to 78 if you from the map that I have shown. So because country endemics are very different from the biogeographic endemics. And of course, what happens to nature if birds disappear? Very few in number. Dr. Sriel has explained that. And of course, I can add one to that, is that the vultures, disappeared. Most of us know that 98% of the vultures crashed, the population crashed over the last 20 years. And so one of the recent estimates by scientists put that in government of India had to spend almost 1 lakh crore over the public health in especially the northwestern India, because of the rising number of the free-ranging dogs in the absence of vultures or the scavenging things. So there was one estimate that came in science. So now that's one reason why what would happen. I mean, nobody could really expect that group of vultures almost becoming extinct can lead to a lakhs of crores of expenditure for the government. So that's just one small example. There are so many examples, as Suhail pointed out. And what are limitations of ornithology? Yes. Cotton pygmy goose phylogeny are the species that share connections. So this question is not very clear to me, but yes, cotton pygmy goose is one interesting clade in Netapus, genus Netapus. There is African cotton pygmy goose, and maybe one more also, probably I think in Southeast Asia. So that's the closest relatives to the cotton pygmy goose. But in Indian avifauna, if you look at the ducks and geese, cotton pygmy goose, the phylogeny, they sit somewhere between the actual geese, and the teals, the teals and smaller ducks. So that's where their phylogenetic position is. I think that's what probably the question is about. I'm not very sure. Okay, I think Suhail, that's all in the spreadsheet. Suhail, can we just move on to the chat box?
Yes, there are a bunch of questions, mostly for you, Jeff.
Okay. Suhail, there's one question from Yoganand Chandraya about the eBird data to understand distribution of birds.
Maybe you can address that, Jaipal. I'll just mention about the second question, internship opportunities in ornithology and how people can connect.
Okay. Yeah.
So there are two ways, Yoganand, to find internships or other opportunities. One is we have a group of us together put together a website called ornithology.in, and I'll put the link in the chat box. And in that website is a directory of ornithologists, and we have compiled a list of faculty level scientists who work in ornithology, specifically those who tend to have opportunities available for young people to work in their labs as volunteers, interns, who offer master's thesis positions, PhD potentially. So please do take a look at that, ornithology.in. And that's one way to find internships in ornithology. The other is to sign up to a mailing list called Yeti, Young Ecologists Talk and Interact. And every day there are messages on Yeti about different kinds of announcements as well as opportunities like volunteering and internships, sometimes paid, sometimes not paid. So I'll put both links in the chat box, and you can use those. And Jaipal, maybe you could discuss distribution based on eBird data.
Yes, eBird data it's an amazing source for get to the distribution at a very finite scale. In fact, if you look at the distribution of any published information, any field guides or handbooks or even the web resources, most of these distribution maps will be like, they're mostly like presumptuous in the sense that they probably connect the outermost points of regular occurrence, and then they put the entire, they just looks like as if they've painted the oriented things. But so that, I mean, that's not wrong in the sense that most of the it's right at the large land, spatial scale. But eBird data being coming from the hotspots, and it's very fine scale. So you can actually draw a distribution. You can draw up a distribution of a species at any spatial scale, whether it's 10 kilometer by 10 kilometer or 25 by 25 kilometer or 100 kilometer. So it gives us the flexibility, spatial flexibility. So in that sense, eBird data is more accurate, and also it's more updated. In fact, you'd be surprised that if you compare the eBird distribution and the distribution in standard field guides, quite a few species, the eBird data will be more accurate because there's updated information, and there's also information coming from unexplored areas in the past. So that way, yes. And there are now of late lots of papers in biogeography, scientific articles in biogeography that's largely drawn the distribution data from eBird. And eBird also has, if some of you are familiar with eBird, if you are on eBird, I would also encourage you to look at the science page in the Cornell University seabird things, and they have provided lots of resources, even for the common bird watcher, how they can analyze the data, how they can, get the distribution map and all those details that you can do it yourself. Okay, those are all administrative questions. For the time being, we'll just look at the technical ones. Then, why at which location the food choice, feeding method, flying speed of falcon change from that of parakeets? Okay, I think this question is probably, from the finding that falcons and parakeets are sister taxa. I mean, earlier we thought that falcons were accipitary forms. Basically, they're closely related to the other raptors. But now we found that falcons and parakeets are actually very close to each other, and they're also sister to the passerines, the songbirds. Now, these are also evolutionary sense. So it is not that at one particular point that their feeding changed or their morphology or their behavior changed. No, it's not like that. It's it's an adaptation, and it's the diversification is a very gradual things, or sometimes very gradual in the sense that for the speciation. So it is not that they change their lifestyle or food choice, overnight or something like that. No, it doesn't happen that way. But they do share the same ancestor. What we know when they say that their parakeets and falcons are sister taxa, we know for sure that they came from the same ancestor. And in fact, the next question is about the same thing, like simpliciomorphy and synapomorphy. So those are the characters that help us to decide whether they share the same ancestor or not. If falcons and parakeets, if they share the same characteristics, then did their ancestors also have the same characters, or if they're not? Like, for example, very simple thing, like falcons and the other raptors. The other raptors are actually diastotaxic in the sense that they have the fifth secondary missing, but the falcons, it's eutaxic. The fifth secondary is present, unlike the other raptors. And also, if you look at the nesting biology, and the falcons lay white colored, even the egg color, everything is matches very well with parakeets, unlike the raptors. So there are quite a few similarities, even in terms of the musculature and the skeletal characters that matches very well with the and it's not completely new. In fact, we would be surprised that even in the 18th century, there are comparative zoologists, anatomists. They proposed that falcons and parakeets are very closer to each other. So it's not something very new that the phylogenetic people have discovered. And the next question, simpliciomorphy and synapomorphy. I think I have answered that in the discussion forum last week. So kindly go through that, because it's been a complicated concept. So to put it very simple terms, see, plesiomorphy is so-called the primitive characters, where the apomorphy is so-called the derived characters. Basically, plesiomorphy will be the characters are the one present in all the taxa that it shares in the clade. But the apomorphy, those characters are not shared with the other taxa, so that it forms its own clade. And when we prefix the term syn or sim, simpliciomorphy or synapomorphy, not shared. So that means that whether these taxa in the particular clade, they share their characters, or do they not share their characters? If they share their characters, these characters are also present in their ancestors or not. If they don't share their character, whether that particular trait is present in the ancestor or not. So these four combinations, gives a matrix by which taxonomists and phylogenists, they decide whether a particular character is taxonomically useful or not. And so I've given also examples in that things, like for mammals and other things. And so, there's a question to you, Sube. How conflicts and wars may be affecting bird migration among the impacted flyways and other things. I guess migration is a separate topic coming up, which will end up later, right?
Yeah, I think in the meantime, you can just do a search, an online search. There's been some research on the Ukraine war and how it seems to have affected the migratory routes of eagles, which were satellite tagged. So with the satellite tagging, one can see how these birds used to migrate, let's say before the war started, and then whether during the war that route has changed. Apparently, there has been an effect over there. And of course, there are many other ways in which war, especially severe wars, can affect bird populations. But I don't think it's something that we have a particular expertise here, so it might be useful to do a search. And also, when the topic of bird migration comes up later in the course, then you can discuss with the instructor there.
Yeah. Okay, greater flamingos and lesser flamingos haven't been spotted in wetlands of Mumbai yet. So, sorry, I don't know much about the thing. Probably, the local birds from Mumbai, ornithologists and birds from Mumbai might know actually much better. Suvin, any idea?
No, I don't know the specific thing, but as a general point of advice, when for many of these things about a specific question about distribution migration, I would say it's very useful to look up the eBird, what they call the bar charts, which are the seasonal sightings of any particular species. And in the bar charts is a very nice feature. You can look at each individual species and look at its how frequently it's been reported across the year. Let's say in Mumbai, and you can compare different years with each other to see if there are differences between years in when they have been reported to come and go and so on. And then you can see whether this particular year is anomalous. Very often when people look at the data like this, they actually discover that the year is not anomalous, that actually it is quite common that in this case, flamingos might only turn up, at this later time. But it's a good reality check to look at the eBird outputs on the website. I'll search for a link for one of these flamingos and send it in the chat here. And then you can compare. And you can, by changing the settings on the eBird tool, you can also look at either multiple years combined or different years separately, just to get a sense for whether your intuition about late or early is borne by the evidence. Yeah.
Yeah. So the next question is Sakshita. But can we discuss the two questions Nepal had asked us? Think on why are there so few endemics in mainland India? Why are there no endemic birds in Lakshadweep Islands? I think I have posted a detailed response this afternoon in the discussion forum. So please go through them. But just to make it simple here, just as an outline of the thing is that. So even though we, India, we have 1,350 species of birds, there are very few, almost like only 4 to 5% of birds are actually endemic to India, despite the large diversity of geographical barriers and everything. So the main reason is that, and when the Indian landmass, I'm talking about the tectonic, the continental plate movement theory. So the Indian landmass, got separated from the Gondwana, and so as you know, Indian landmass and the Mauritius, and the not Mauritius, but what the other Madagascar, Indian landmass and the Madagascar were together for almost 20 million years. After that, Indian landmass moved, separated from Madagascar, and then started moving towards northeast for almost 100 million years. So conventionally, we thought that Indian landmass was like a completely isolated island for 100 million years. So till it hits the 50 million years ago, it hits the Asian plate, and then the Himalayas erupted. Now, the explanation is that when probably the Indian landmass had lots of endemic, because 100 million years in isolation, obviously there must have been quite a few endemic species. But when the Indian landmass hit the Himalayas 50 million years ago, 48 to 50 million years ago, then the Himalayas erupted. And at around the same time, one of the most severest forms of volcanic eruption happened in the Deccan Plateau. That's called the Deccan Trap. And just like that, the Cretaceous KT boundary event, like meteorite hit the Deccan, the volcanic eruption completely covered the entire Indian landmass in dark suits for almost I think, two glacials. So, both the events, the rise of Himalayas and the volcanic eruption, both probably would have decimated all the landforms or most of the landforms that were existent at that time. So that's why the biogeographers believe that there are very few endemics in the Indian avifauna. Probably what the other birds that we saw later is that they migrated or they colonized much later than the Himalayas, eruption of Himalaya or the Deccan Trap event. Now, to counter this is the conventional view, but to counter this, the Ashok Sawhney, he proposed in late 1980s, mid 1990s. He proposed that, in fact, the Indian landmass was never as isolated as we thought for 100 million years ago. What he proposed is that the Indian landmass always moved along the east coast of Africa, which is quite closer, and the Indian landmass and the African landmass were connected by the Mascarene and Laccadive's Ridge, where the Lakshadweep Islands are right now, the coral formation is done. So, sorry, the birds always, could easily cross over from Africa, and there were a lot of exchange of African and Indian avifauna. So that exchange means that there's very little scope for any endemism to, evolve in the Indian subcontinents. That's Ashok Sawhney's explanations. And there's also John Briggs. Actually, he's a marine fish biologist, and looking at he studied the fish distribution of the eastern and western parts of the Indian Ocean, and he found that they were diverged much less than 3 million years ago. Again, leading to a proposition hypothesis that probably Indian land mass was probably much more connected to the African land mass. Now, these are all alternate hypotheses, and this is probably the reason why there are very few endemics in the mainland Indian avifauna. Of course, we have quite a few endemics in the Sri Lanka and also in some subcontinent, also in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. But we don't have any endemic birds in the Lakshadweep Islands. And so I think one of the participants has rightly answered in that discussion forum, saying that Lakshadweep Islands are actually coral islands, unlike the Andaman and Nicobar. See, Andaman and Nicobar Islands are actually nothing but mountain peaks. They are mountain peaks which are exposed over the sea. So otherwise, it's a long range of mountain, the Arakan range from Myanmar, Indo-Myanmar border. That's the Arakan range that comes south and then goes underwater, under the Arabian Sea, and that emerges in several places. That's where it became the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And so since they're on the mountain peaks, so they still harbor a lot of good dense vegetation. And so that dense vegetation means niche diversification. That leads to a lot of species to colonize and diversify. But in Lakshadweep, there isn't any native vegetation as such, because Lakshadweep was formed by coral deposits over millions of years over the ridge. So it's just a coral deposit. And so what we see today in Lakshadweep is only the coconut plantation and some avenue trees like neem and other things. So we don't have any species that is endemic to the Lakshadweep as such. But though we do have quite a few, like I think 50, 60 species of land birds are there, and quite a few species birds are there. I think please go through the discussion forum. I've given also a couple of key references for you to read. Srivastava. Sorry, there's some question on interbreeding hybrid category as liger, mule, and they consider that they're infertile, weak, but not natural. So why interbreeding happens even in captivity? Is this illegal? Sorry, the question is not very clear. Suhail, can you help? Shresh Srivastava.
Yeah,
question.
I'm not expert in interbreedings and hybrids. So very often the hybrids we see are only seen in captivity. And sometimes they're deliberately created where keepers in zoos will put a male from one species, a female from another species together, and otherwise they would never interbreed. But it is equally true that in birds, at least, we do see a large number of different kinds of hybrids in nature as well. At maybe at the edge of the range where two species range meets, one occasionally sees hybrids. Or sometimes we see also hybrids in the middle of when both species, and these tend to be between species that are very closely related, obviously, because if species are distantly related, then they're genetically incompatible. So even if mating happens, then either fertilization doesn't happen, or the embryo doesn't develop, or if the embryo develops, it doesn't come to full term, or if it comes to full term, then it dies soon after hatching or being born. Or if they still survive, then they don't survive until reproductive age. So there are many stages at which hybrids can fail. But between closely related species, for example, there's a very famously studied example of two closely related flycatcher species in Sweden, I think. And there it seems that in certain times of the season, females are unable to find a mate of their own species. And so if there is a male of another species who is around and singing, then the females may mate with the other species. And they do produce viable offspring. The hybrids hatch and survive. And in fact, they might even survive long enough to themselves reproduce. So there is, there are the two different species that are whatever, pure in some sense, but there are also intermixed with this population, a set of individuals that are hybrids at different levels. Some of them are first generation and they be multiple generation. There's a lot of very interesting work on hybrids. I'm not all that familiar, but please do make a search on bird hybrids, for example, and there's a lot of fascinating work on hybrids in the wild. In captivity, I don't know. Hybrids are illegal. I'm not quite sure if you're in a zoo. And for a long time, these hybrid mammals have been bred. But I don't know if there's any law that regulates it.
Yeah, but there are some some tax which are legal actually, like aviculture. It's a very legally valid
That's right.
profession. So they do import some of these, pigeons, pheasants,
Yes.
and they are all bred. They are bred for particular character, particular trait, and they're completely legal. And they can sell as long as they're not found in the wild in India.
Yeah.
And also as long as these species are not cited, not listed in CITES or something like that.
Yeah, it's better to think of those species as domestic or domesticated.
Yeah.
Just like our cats and dogs, there are different varieties and they interbreed and so on, and people interbreed them.
But the only thing is that now the government of India has made all the aviculture and breeding, everything to be like, we require to list it in the portal, MMFCC called portal called Parivesh. So that Parivesh portal, all the breeders, whether the domestic or whether it is wild from the abroad or this thing, they have to register themselves. And so that's now become mandatory with the recent 2022 amendment in the Wildlife Protection Act.
But this would not apply to domestic, what are considered domestic taxa, correct?
Yeah, like pheasants, in the sense that, yeah. So the species which could also be found in the wild in abroad, the other countries.
Yeah. So there's a long this thing about the Yeti mailing list, which is a very useful thing. I encourage all of you to subscribe. Then next question, I think, is Jaipal, in some species, is it true that juveniles migrate before adults?
Juveniles migrate before adults. Sorry, I think I'm not very sure. Maybe later with bird migration, Dr. Suresh or somebody was going to give, may be able to answer this question. Because I'm not very familiar with bird migration.
Yeah, it is true that in some species, adults migrate before juveniles. So juveniles don't have the opportunity to follow adults to kind of learn from them, but they migrate after the adults have migrated. But yes, I think we have Suresh potentially giving a guest lecture on migration, and we can address that during that.
Yeah. as we have seen, the another question, and this was about the Great Indian Bustard and what we are doing to, recover the population. Is there any possibility? Well, yeah, it's keeping the fingers crossed, and 140 and 130 or 140 individuals or pairs are left in the wild right now. And so, like Wildlife Institute of India and MOFCC, they have set up a captive breeding center in Rajasthan, in Desert National Park. And so I think that they have a long-term plan to captivate the individuals and release them. But the challenge is that we have to release them because their potential habitats already face the threats. The threats have not been removed. The major threats would be the power lines, because that the entire Northwest India has become the hotbed for the solar farms and windmills, and for the transmission lines, the power lines, they crisscross the country, and the majority of the mortality of great Indian Bustard for the last 10 years happened out of the collision with the power line. So Supreme Court has recently asked the the power companies and state governments to make it mandatory to earth the power line, the subterranean power line. But the tussle still goes on, so we don't know what will happen, and so that's the main issue. I think so. We hope for the best. And yeah, the discussion forum, it is there actually, the Q&A. If you can just see the section Q&A, the discussion forum. Right. Any other questions? I think there's one question that was posted. If any diagrams for those wings, please share so that I can connect with the concepts better. I think it is there in the resources reading materials that we have shared. So,
yeah, there was one question about reading material, Jaipal, which is some of the reading material is behind a paywall. Harshita has asked this question. I thought that we had fixed the reading material so that we were using only material that was freely available. Maybe I can request Amrita. Amrita, if you can go through the reading material and just check which of the resources are not freely and publicly available, then the course faculty we can figure out either alternative resources or a way in which that particular resource can be gotten access for free. Yeah, so that's a useful thing.
Sure. Yeah, I think we have worked on last year. Also, but we didn't change a few links, so we'll fix this year. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for the question. That's a really important point. What's the point of giving reading material if you can't access it? So we'll try and fix this as soon as possible. Thanks, Harshita. We are approaching to the end of we have an hour-long session, so it's 4 minutes to go. Sukh asks, will these live sessions be recorded? And I think that's correct, Amrita. They will be recorded.
Yes. No? Yeah, these are recorded. Yeah. And it's on the YouTube live sessions. You can see, like on the portal, they will share the recorded videos. Links.
On the dashboard on the left-hand side, it's a left-hand side menu, and for different weeks, there's a different subhead. So if you click on the particular week number, you should be able to see, maybe not immediately, but after a day or two, you should be able to see the video recording. All right.
There was also one question on whether the materials would change for the last 2 years. It's the 5th year, I think. So I think you have responded saying that there are not going to be much changes, except some statistics like number of birds in India recorded, because we keep increasing, every year we keep adding new species, new additions to Indian area.
Yeah, there are some.
Other than that.
Yeah. Sorry, Jaipal, go ahead.
Yeah. So other than that, there aren't any major changes as such, and thankfully the taxonomy and also kind of stabilized for birds. So
yeah. I mean, one thing you notice, because this was the first course was 2022, and therefore we were recording the lectures in 2021, second half 2021.
Right. Yeah.
Most of us were recording from home. You can see the videos are not very great. and the standard of recording has gone up since then. This was during the pandemic, of course, if you remember.
Yeah.
So we will probably in the maybe next year or the year after that we'll kind of re-record our videos and
Re-record, I think.
perhaps upgrade
Yeah.
some of the production quality, but that doesn't apply to this 2026 course. Yeah. Mhm. Great, then we'll draw it to an
Yeah.
end. Thanks, Amrita, for
Yes.
organizing it, and NPTEL team who's silently there, of course, behind everything that we do. And Jaipal, great, yeah, thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for spending a
Thank you.
Republic Day. I
Thanks.
should have said Happy Republic Day.
Happy.
We're a republic of people and a republic of birds. So happy Republic Day to birds and people, both. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you
All right.
everyone
Yeah.
for joining
Thank,
in.
Bye. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
thanks, Amrita. Thanks.
Thank you, all of you.